The chainsaws roared before dawn, echoing through the quiet woods. By the time the dust cleared, my family's old hunting cabin lay in ruined splintered wood, shattered windows, and the charred smell of bulldozed history. The HOA president stood smugly at the edge of the clearing, waving papers about unpaid fees I never owed. They didn't know that I wasn't just another homeowner. I was a sitting federal judge, and in the silence that followed, I promised myself, if they thought they could erase me, they hadn't seen justice yet. The cabin wasn't just a weekend retreat. It was my grandfather's Lagosha modest wooden structure tucked into the pine woods of the Midwest. Built with his hands after he returned from serving in World War II, it became a sanctuary where my father taught me how to hunt, where we gathered each winter to share stories by the fire, and where I found peace when the pressures of the courtroom weighed heavy. But in recent years, the surrounding land had been swallowed by a sprawling homeowners association. They paved over old trails, erected private property signs, and pushed rules that dictated everything from the color of mailboxes to how long a truck could idle. I lived an hour away in the city, but the cabin still sat on the last untouched parcel deeded in my name. One autumn, I arrived to find an envelope tacked to the cabin door. Inside was a notice of delinquent fees from the HOA, demanding thousands of dollars for community maintenance I had never agreed to. I laughed at first, thinking it was some bureaucratic mistake. My land predated their association by decades. The cabin stood outside their jurisdiction. But the letters kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. They claimed they'd file liens, garnish wages, even seize property. My neighbors warned me the HOA president, a wealthy man with political ties, had bullied others into compliance. Still, I ignored them, certain the law would protect me. What I didn't realize was that they weren't planning to wait for the courts. They were going to destroy what they couldn't control. It started with harassment. Each time I drove up the dirt road, I'd find new signs hammered into the trees. No trespassing, HOA-controlled property. Trash was dumped in my driveway. More than once, I arrived to find my locks changed, forcing me to break into my own cabin. When I filed police reports, the local sheriff shrugged, muttering that these disputes were civil matters. But the pattern was clear. The HOA wanted to force me out. Then came the inspection notices. A clipboard-wielding man walked around my cabin, jotting notes about code violations, the size of my porch, the color of the shutters, even the fire pit out back. He didn't care that none of their bylaws applied to my property. He said it was non-compliant and fined me $500 a day. I thought it was intimidation, until one winter morning, I drove up and froze. The cabin was gone, not damaged, not vandalized. Gone. The ground was littered with shattered lumber and broken glass. Bulldozer tracks still fresh in the mud. A posted notice declared, "Structure removed, known compliance with HOA standards." I stood there for hours, numb. Decades of family memories gone in a single morning because a group of petty tyrants decided they could erase me. But grief quickly hardened into rage. They had trespassed, destroyed private property, and violated every principle of due process. And the irony? They had done it to a federal judge who spent his career ruling on property rights, civil liberties, and equal treatment under the law. I began digging. County records showed no demolition permits filed. Their notices weren't legally binding, and the signatures authorizing the destruction forged. Worse yet, neighbors told me the HOA bragged that no one would stop them. That's when I realized they hadn't just bulldozed a cabin. They had bulldozed themselves into a federal case. The courtroom was packed the day the HOA faced me not as a neighbor, but as a judge. Their smug president entered, expecting another rubber stamp hearing where local connections would shield him. But instead, he was confronted by federal marshals and a stack of evidence that painted the HOA as nothing short of a criminal enterprise. I recused myself from presiding, of course, but my colleagues in the judiciary didn't take kindly to vigilante demolitions. The case unfolded like a storm: fraudulent liens, illegal trespassing, destruction of private property, and even racketeering charges. Each photograph of the demolished cabin tightened the noose around their defense. The HOA president's face lost color when the forged documents were displayed. His allies squirmed as neighbors testified about intimidation, harassment, and racial targeting, because many of the families they harassed weren't white. Mine wasn't the first cabin destroyed, just the first tied to someone they couldn't bully. When the verdict was read, it echoed like thunder. Guilty. Multiple board members were sentenced to prison. Millions in damages were awarded, including restitution for every family the HOA had wronged. For the first time in years, justice wasn't just a word in the courtroom. It was real, and it was devastating. Months later, I returned to the clearing where my cabin once stood. The land was quiet, pine needles carpeting the earth where walls and beams used to rise. In the distance, the foundation stones still sat like gravestones, reminders of what had been stolen. I didn't rebuild, not yet. Instead, I placed a single plaque on the site. Here stood a family's legacy, destroyed by greed, restored by justice. Neighbors visited, leaving flowers, notes, and photographs of their own struggles with the HOA. The plaque became a symbol, not just of my fight, but of every homeowner who had been silenced, bullied, or erased. The case sent shockwaves through homeowner associations nationwide. Federal oversight committees began investigating their unchecked power. Families who had lost homes or land found new courage to challenge abusive boards. My role as judge prevented me from ever personally profiting from the lawsuit. But the victory wasn't about money, it was about precedent. Injustice thrives when bullies believe no one will stand against them. The HOA believed they could rewrite laws, demolish history, and target those who didn't look or live like them. They believed wrong. As I walked away from the clearing, I thought about my grandfather, about the cabin he built with scarred hands and stubborn pride. Though the walls were gone, his spirit lived on in the justice delivered. And maybe that's the real legacy, because sometimes the demolition of a cabin can spark the demolition of an empire built on corruption. So I leave you with this question. If power can erase a home in silence, what else might it erase, lest we stand against it?